I give you Chris.
I'll just say a quick word before we bring Chris on. So hello everybody, welcome, thank you for coming today. It's a real pleasure to be here for the final part of the Islands series. So I'm the Regional Engagement Officer at the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and I've been working with colleagues from UHI, HIE and HIE to plan this 2-day event and the previous 2 events in Skye and Harris. The event today is being live streamed and recorded, so there are ample opportunities to enjoy the presentations later at your opportunity. And of course we welcome comments and questions from the floor and people online. I'll now hand over to Professor Chris Whatley, who will be able to speak a bit more about the programme.
Okay, good morning folks, great to be here again. It's a bit eerie standing here. I keep seeing my father out there on the left. But anyway, today's session is kicking off with Professor Michael Anderson, who's a very distinguished economic historian and demographer. And I should say this, that every one of our speakers at these sessions has been really splendid. But Michael is the only person we've invited back. So Michael's going to address us on, well, he's talked about islands, the population in the Islands Past session, and he's now going to talk about diverse futures, Scotland's island populations. And I like that because that's very much in keeping with the theme of, or one of the themes that's come up during this series, and that is not all islands are the same. So Michael, without further ado, over to you.
Right. Becky, can you come and put it on full screen for me, please?
Oh, yeah.
So I can read it.
Yeah. Oh, that should come.
That's it.
There we go.
Okay. Right, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Good, right, okay. First, just an apology. This is not quite the refined talk that I would have liked to have been able to give, because I only got the data 3 weeks ago, and there's an awful lot of it. And the one thing I have to say to you is if some of my figures are different from those that you've read from the Scottish Government, mine are right and theirs are wrong, because theirs are based on estimates which have turned out to be way out, in some cases several hundred people out in some of the islands, and I can explain if anybody wants to know why that I think that's happened, but certainly my figures, I got them specially from National Records of Scotland, sent to me, and mine are right. Okay. Scotland has had many inhabited islands. Chris talked about this yesterday. There are about, I'm going to talk about sea-surrounded islands, at least at high tide. In 2011, about 87 were inhabited, and there was, it says on the slide, 103,700 roughly residents. The 2022 census has found more inhabited islands. In fact, I think the most since at least 1981. And there may be, again, some COVID-related, for example, reasons for that. But basically, the number of residents has gone down very slightly to 102,900, but that figure is still higher than at any census since 1951. And in fact, if the islands were their own local authority, then there would be 11 local authorities in Scotland that were worse than them. And that, I think, is quite important from thinking about a policy implications. There are a lot of places which are worse than the islands as a whole. But of course, islands have always had very diverse populations, which is why I've called this diverse futures, because there are certainly diverse pasts. 48 islands, according to the latest census figures, had fewer than 100 residents. 28 had less than 10, and those are obviously very vulnerable islands when their populations get down that level. On the other hand, 14 islands have more than 1,000, and 4 have more than 10,000, and those make up 2/3 of the population of Scotland. Those just 4 islands, this is nothing to do with island groups or local authorities or anything, that's just those 4. Lewis Harris treated as 1 island, Shetland and Orkney mainland and Skye. And that's the pattern since 1981. And as you can see, the yellow line, up goes Skye by 44%, up goes Orkney mainland by 27%. Shetland has been going up and down. It's actually down by 2 in the official new census figures. And Lewis and Harris, which looked in 2001 as if they might be going up, and the Scottish Government projections thought they might be going up, that also has gone down again. And that, in a sense, is part of a pattern of the whole of the Western Isles. The Uists, South Uist at the top, the black line, firmly in decline. North Uist, similarly, but not quite as fast. Benbecula, that's the closure of the military installation. And the only one that shows any sign of optimism is Barra. And that is obviously at least partly linked to the successful fisheries activity, but probably other things as well. And then, again, a pattern, a very mixed pattern here. Arran and Bute, which became increasingly redundant as holiday islands as people stopped flying to the sun. But I think there may be other reasons as well which we might want to think about. Islay, which has been in continuous and ongoing decline in spite of all that whiskey. And then the opposite one, Mull, which has been on a steady rising path. Mull since 1981 has gone up by 39%. And the contrast between Mull and Islay, I think, is quite interesting in terms of trying to think about factors that affect past, present and future. And then, well, this is the changing populations of the Orkney Islands, mainland to the left, and then Barib, South Roncha. The ones that are attached to the mainland, or extremely close, have done well. The ones that are further away have done badly, and broadly speaking, although that's since 1981, the recent pattern, obviously the percentage changes are not as much, but the recent pattern is actually pretty similar. And as somebody I read recently said, oh, well, Chapinsay is a commuting island. And actually, the biggest thing you have to remember about rural Scotland is that although the populations have been doing very well, it's commuting. It's not primarily things that go on in those rural communities. It's the fact you only have to drive, as I have done on a number of occasions, into Stornoway to see, at sort of 5 o'clock in the evening, to see the traffic pouring out. So ability to communicate and other similar things I'll talk about in a minute is absolutely crucial as a factor that helps to ensure population rise. That's the Shetland Islands, same broad pattern, Trondra, Burras, Mucklerow, again attached, and over the right-hand side here, Fetla, Unst, Fair Isle, poor Fair Isle with its burnt observation centre at the moment is necessarily doing quite well. And then the smaller Argyll Islands. Now, the smaller Argyll Islands are interesting because if we look at it over 1981 to 2022, you can see, again, the same proximity this time to Oban on the left-hand side, and over the right-hand side here, a rather strange and mixed pattern. But probably most of you won't be able to see it, but at the bottom I put in the last 10 years. And Lismore, Eastdale, Ling, all going down Easdale only just creeping up. That's becoming an aged population. The young people have moved out, and the aged population, plus no doubt a bit of second homes, is part of the problem, because these figures are all residents. So they're a very mixed pattern across the small islands. So that's the past. In the past, there have been highly diverse changes. But the past doesn't foretell the future. But, and this is a theme of everything that I have written in recent years, pasts leave legacies, and they sustain diversities. And one of the here we have some of the ways, and Chris talked about these yesterday, so I don't need to go into them in detail. How is the past influence the future? Well, if you have a diversified economy, and particularly if you're reasonably big, you've got a greater resilience, access to all these hospitals and medical centres and secondary education, and again, attractions for commuters are all very significant. Some places have major visitor attractions. Iona is a classic example here, and of course, as we know, the Orkneys. Long-standing activities will come to an end, but somebody referred yesterday, I thought, very nicely to repurposing of old facilities. And let's hope that that might be possible on Flotter, because as we noticed, Flotter has been doing very badly. But lack of any of those things that are at the top there make a shift from decline to growth hard. The islands that have been in decline, unless they've got one of those, or a particularly entrepreneurial activity led from within, as on Jura, you will get very difficult to turn round decline. But there is one variable which is a legacy everywhere, and that's the population age profiles. Now that's the age profile of the population of Scotland. Single years across the bottom, from under 1 to actually 100 and over at the right-hand side, and actual numbers up the left-hand side. And it drops up and down like mad. And that's historically influenced. The right-hand bump, people born in 1946, 47, all that time ago, but it's still there. The top, that's the baby boomers. The decline down to 76, 77, that's the pill, and also some shift in particularly married women's employment. And then over the right-hand side, there is the flat bit, that's 2008 to 2012. This is births, right? And 2,000 people who were born, and since then we have seen a decline, and it's there fixed within the population profile. That is the population profile of the islands, all of them for the moment, and clearly it's very different. And what is missing is easier to see if we go to columns. And now this is 5-year columns, under 5 to 100 and over. And perversely, because of the way that Excel operates and the way I set it up, apologies for this, the islands are blue and Scotland is red. But as you can see, on the left-hand side there, the blue lines are lower, fewer children, many fewer teenagers, in fact, dramatically fewer. And then if we get to the right-hand side, the blue lines are much above the red ones, and that's the fact that the populations of the islands as a whole are old. But diversity. Orkney mainland in blue, and 4 southern islands, Hoy, South Walls, Farra and Flotter, in red. And you can see Orkney mainland actually doesn't look very different from Scotland as a whole in terms of its profile. That's very, very encouraging for the future, in as far as we're encouraged at all about the projections for the population of Scotland. But over on the right-hand side, that's a real danger for the future. Quite possibly, as I shall suggest at the end, may even be irreversible, some of it. But they're not the worst. That's Great Cumbrae off the Ayrshire coast. Virtually nothing in the younger age groups, and this huge clump of people from 55 onwards. Two things there: closure of the marine station on the one hand, and retirement on the other, has produced that extraordinary age profile. And there is the proportion of the population at certain age groups on different islands. The top one, well, if you go to the right-hand side, they go from Flotter, 79% age 50 and over, down to mainland Scotland, well, immediately above it, Shetland mainland, 42%. The middle column is people aged 25 to 39, the sort of people that islands would like to have lots of. Flotter has one person in that age group in the latest figures. Up to 18 in Orkney mainland, 18 in Shetland mainland. That's not bad. And then the 0 to 17s, the children category, Flotter, 10%, these are percentages of the population, up to Shetland mainland, and also Barra, remember, Barra was going up. Barra's got lots of children. It's also, of course, a Roman Catholic island, which may help. But there is the differences. So, but why doesn't, why are we bothering about all these things? Surely the problem is just that young adults leave in droves. And Rose's brilliant talk yesterday illustrated both some of the strengths of that argument and also pointed to weaknesses. Isn't it that leads to the falling island populations? Well, not nearly as much as is sometimes claimed, because many of the islands have huge numbers of immigrants at slightly older age groups. Some, but not all islands. And what I've done in this graph is I've compared the population by year of age in 2022, that's the blue line, with the population in 2011 moved forward 11 years. And that enables you to see what? Enables you to see where there is in movement and where there is out movement. And right at the left-hand side, this is Orkney mainland, has been getting in young people. It has been losing, as almost all islands do, people aged between about 17 and 29. But thereafter, the blue line is above the red line right the way through until, the 60s. That's people moving in. The right-hand bit, of course, is affected by people dying off, but we don't have to worry about that, fortunately, too much over the left-hand side. That's Orkney mainland when you do it by subtracting one from the other. And you can see, there you are, there's the pattern look of from about 30 onwards, right the way across until about 64, there is net in movement. But you contrast that with Shetland mainland. Now remember that 0 is just above the numbers. Shetland mainland has actually remarkably few years where there are actually net in migrants. And by the time you get to about the 40s, there is net out movement from Shetland. And that's, I think, very important in producing potentially for the future very different patterns. That's Skye, completely different, because the scales go from 1 to -1 on the right-hand side. That's percentage of the population. And you can see Skye, huge numbers, right through to the early 60s, net in terms of in movement. And Mull is even more extraordinary, not just through to the mid-60s, but right through until the late 60s. People retire to Mull. In fact, at the last census, there were lots of people on Mull who were migrants from England, some huge proportion of the elderly population on Mull were actually born in England. So here then, I added up the gains and the losses. Orkney, between 18 and 28, loses about 2.7% of its population, but it gets back 3.9. In other words, there's a net inflow of about 1.7. Shetland, because not many people, lots of people leave as well as come in their 30s to 60s, Shetland is actually an island of net out-migration. And by contrast, Skye and Mull, very different. Yes, young people go away, but far, far more of them come back. Just look at Mull. And then at the other end, the Western Isles, only 2.3% of the population come back. So they've got a good net negative figure. And there is South Uist. South Uist is interesting. Lots of people actually moving into South Uist. But the problem with South Uist is that the huge net out migration of people aged 18 to 28. So, skewed age profiles pose a lot of problems. There's the problem of social and medical care. There's collapsing school rolls. There's one which came up only this week, which is that as people, an island in which lots of people are aged, there'll be a lot more single-person households. Particularly, people get widowed and children leave home. And so the single-person household issue is a big one, and is a big one together in some islands with this big in-migration of people in their 30s to 40s. That's one of the reasons for housing shortages. It's not the only reason, but it's an important reason for housing shortage, is in fact that aged populations have large numbers of single-person households. But, oops, sorry, jumped a page. But they also influence population change directly, and they do it by their impact on fertility and mortality. Now, this is the birth rates, the left-hand time for Scotland, birth rate 9.6 per thousand, death rate 10.9 per thousand. So in fact, net, you're losing about 1.3%. That's got to be made up by in-migrants unless you're not going to decline. The Western Isles is pretty actually horrendous in terms of the ordinary things. Birth rate 7.8, nearly 2 below Scotland. Death rate 13.5, hugely high. And so actually the difference between births and deaths is producing a big decline in the population of the Western Isles. Well, why is this happening? Well, somebody wrote a letter to the Oban Times a few weeks ago saying the problem is all these young women not having enough babies. And there's also, of course, all this traditional stuff about all these dreadful islanders drinking themselves to death. But actually, if we ask what the rates would be if the islands had the same age profile as the population of Scotland, you get a very different picture. And that's the birth rates from the National Records of Scotland figures, where they've taken into account the age profile of the populations. And when you do that, the Western Isles actually has a higher birth rate than Scotland as a whole, and it has a lower death rate. If Western Isles had the same age profile as the population of Scotland, its population would actually be going up. And the same would apply to the Orkneys here. There's a negative 2.7 natural increase, but actually, if we controlled for age, it goes to plus 1.1. However, if we look forward over the next 10 years, and even more over the next 20, the problem starts to look even worse. The challenges, as I think we should put it, being positive, because there will be even more oldest people. Remember, that's the age profile of the islands, and it peaks between about 55 and, shall we say, 65. In 10 years' time, that will be 65 to 75. And in 20 years' time, it will be 75 to 85. And so the death rate would go up a lot. And I did a little modelling. I tried to estimate what the number of births and the number of deaths might be using recent birth and death rate figures through to 2032, just to see what would happen. At Orkney mainland, I reckon, you don't need to worry, the deaths and births are in grey on the left-hand side. The net likely loss is about 670 people. That's 4%. That's a challenge, but potentially doable. North Ron and Sandy, the net loss is 90, only 20 births and 120 deaths. That's 16% of the population. And then Shetland mainland, 6, Lewis Harris, 8%, Skye, interesting, 8%. Skye's got a lot of old people as well, is the problem. And it doesn't have particularly high fertility. And then finally, at the bottom, poor Great Cumbrae, where actually the difference between births and deaths, hardly any children, what was it, 35, and a population of over 1,000. And that's 20% of the population would disappear. So, just to maintain current populations, even with no net outmigration, very substantial in-migration is going to be needed on some islands, or would be needed on some islands, but not on others. And on some, those numbers may be so high that it's actually very difficult to see that they could ever be delivered. And so there are some islands, and I share this opinion with other members, I'm afraid to say, of the Scottish Government's expert advisory group. There are some islands where the only future may be mitigation in a decline. But islands then face many challenges in the future, but they're very different on different islands. And remember, there are 93 of them. Under those circumstances, can there be a meaningful island policy? Should the Scottish Government start talking about islands as a block? And indeed, can they realistically try to support population numbers on all this huge diversity of islands? Remember, Orkney is the 11th best performer in Scotland. Remember that Western Isles is the worst, but they're not far below Inverclyde and Dumfries and Galloway. Put too much money into the Western Isles, and boy, there are going to be complaints into Orkney, or even Shetland. There are going to be complaints from Dumfries and Galloway and Inverclyde. And so that is my conclusion.
Thanks very much, Michael. That was astonishing. Well, hugely interesting, but astonishing because you've done it in 3 weeks. That's a tremendous piece of work. Some people get PhDs for doing that kind of thing, and they take 3 years or 4. Anyway, thank you very much. That was astonishing and fascinating, and so well grounded in the evidence. I love that sort of thing, and the conclusions you're coming to as well. So, are there any questions? Have you got? Right, okay. So, questions, comments? Yes, at the right back there.
Hello, apologies for arriving late, but I wasn't following along online as I got here, so I did hear most of what you said. There was a slide you had earlier on about a lot of out-migration of, I think it was 17 to 25-year-olds, and a lot of in-migration of the next age group up. Is there any way of knowing whether those are, to what extent those are people returning, or to what extent those are people actually coming into the island for a while to work or live or whatever? And if it's the latter, what kind of impacts or what kind of considerations should we give to kind of cultural life of islands? It's a vague question, but I hope you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I'm a population historian, and I wouldn't want to get too deeply into the cultural impact of population change, and other people may feel that is easier to respond to. I mean, there are obviously challenges in any pattern of change of this kind, and particularly in the loss of the younger people and the arrival of incomers. And of course the critical thing, and this is one of the things that we don't know yet, we don't know where they came from, we don't actually know what they do. I mean, some of the islands clearly have had in the past large inflows of people from England, Mull being a classic example, and Rosie had one, I can't remember where it was, but another one yesterday. And so yes, there are serious impacts, because ideally you would want to have islands able to sustain very well their own populations, but they can't.
Yes, Rosie.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Wonderful to see a breakdown by islands and also by demographics. I just wondered about the older people. So one of the things that sort of comes up anecdotally is adults at retirement age moving away to be closer to children.
Yes.
And also the very oldest populations moving away to access residential care, for example, or other forms of care. And I just wondered if you had any comment really on that experience of out-migration, perhaps, of the older age groups kind of post-retirement.
The interesting problem, I mean, the real problem with this, as you know, is you can't do it from net figures, because once you get into the 60s, you've got a real problem that the method I was using includes both out-migration and deaths. However, in probably, I think it's meant to be November, we will actually get moves over the last year. And when we get moves over the last year, that will enable us to actually see who it is, who is the age groups who are actually moving. At least I hope it will. We may have to wait until next summer for this, 3 years after the census. But and I think undoubtedly you're right. Undoubtedly you're right. But the extent of it, the net figure doesn't show, because it combines out migration and death. Sorry about that, but that's the only method I can find for doing this on the basis simply of all the data they published so far is for island groups, not even individual islands. I got the individual islands data separately, but for island groups, if any of you have a handout, you will see that on it there are island groups, and then the islands within the island groups. And for that, we can actually get the island groups, we can get age profiles down to single year of age, which is brilliant, but we can't do net out migration. So we can't do gross out migration figures in and out for elderly people, because too many of them are dying. Sorry about that.
Dear me, that's cheerful. Des.
Thank you, Michael. So it's fascinating. I'm just thinking about Colonsay. So that's the poorest of all the Argyll Islands. Yet it's the island where there's going to be substantial investment in housing.
Yes.
I think 20 houses are to be built. And it strikes me that if young families move in, and if there are jobs for young families, we may see this sort of upsurge.
Yes.
But contrary, we may see some of these houses being occupied by people coming out to retire, which could be the death knell of Colonsay in the longer term. So I'm wondering, how important are jobs in this, jobs that are sustaining young people? It strikes me that there's a whole analysis that could be done there. You think of Lewis, the Arnish Yard, substantial numbers of jobs being created there, but a lack of housing for people, and how that would be reflected in the census. So just to hear about this tension between jobs, young people versus old people moving into the islands.
That's again, it's a fascinating question. We don't know the occupational figures yet, and we will just get them. The Colonsay because it's just big enough. An island has to have a population of about 60 before you start to get information, and it won't be that detailed, but we will get some. I mean, I think Colonsay is an interesting example because I said earlier, if you can get an entrepreneurial activity, and on a small island, it may only need to be one. On big islands, it needs to be a lot. You know, and one of the great things about Mull, in addition to the fact that it's only just 45 minutes from Oban, so you can even go shopping, you know, in the 4 supermarkets that there are in Oban. The great thing about that, compared with Isla, where you've got a 2-hour journey and then you've got an hour's drive. Now, Colonsay is interesting, but Mull, finishing the sentence, sorry, Mull is actually a multi-activity island as well. It's very diverse. Yes, it could do. It could do very well. And one of the questions, I think, is whether or not anybody is going to be brave enough to actually allocate houses and stop people migrating in order to support the new activity. And if I don't understand exactly what's going on Jura, but I think partly because it's being run by one entrepreneur, I think they are able to control very much who comes in. Is that right? Yeah.
Okay, that's great, Michael. That takes us actually to our next, the issue of housing, to our next speaker. So thank you. Can we thank Michael? That's a tremendous piece of work. Thank you very much. And indeed, as I said, now I haven't met Luke Fraser. You're Luke Fraser.
That's
great,
me.
Good to see you. I did see you last night. I should have spoken to you, but I didn't. Anyway, Luke's got he'll be well known in these parts, but he has a fantastic background in housing issues, I think, public, private, and so on. So just the right person to follow on from Michael and talk about sustainable practices in island communities. Yeah, well, thank you very much, Luke.
All right. Good morning. All right, so my name's Luke. I am going to be speaking about resilient islands, adapting for the challenges of the 21st century. Now, that word "for" is really important because it could have been two. It could have been things are coming, they hit us, and we then have to change and adapt to them. But I want to take a bit of a forward look about what we can potentially do in terms of foresight. What can we see coming down the line that we can potentially do a little bit of work to adapt them beforehand. And a couple of quotes to jump into. Let's check the time, there we go. And this one is from a lady called Elizabeth Edwards. And it says, resilience is accepting a new reality, even if it's less good than the one you had before. You can fight it, you can do nothing but scream about what you've lost, or you can accept it and try to put something together that's good. I think that ties in quite well with what Michael's just said about population. There are some islands we're going to be able to do some really good stuff, but there's some islands it's going to be really difficult. Now that's a difficult thing to do. We can work through that. We now know that's going to be an issue. How do we address that going forward? And the next one, this is from Albert Einstein. I think it fits in quite well with the series. Learn from yesterday, live for today, do the best you can with what you have for today, and then hope for tomorrow. But the important thing is not to stop questioning. And what I want to do today is ask some questions. I don't have the answers. Some of this stuff might be a little bit but it's very much about asking questions, about seeing what we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is adapting. What do we need to adapt to? So these are some of the external threats that are out there. Climate change is one that we know is coming down the line, is one that is here already, but is something we have to potentially adapt to going forward. Whether you believe in it or not, the policy is we're going to have to do stuff around it, so that's a key one that we're going to have to adapt to. There's geopolitical issues, east versus west. There's lots going on with that at the moment. That's something that, again, is going to impact us, whatever happens, and we're going to have to adapt to it. Next, you've got war in Ukraine. You've got the issues that are going on around that. You've then got the cultural issues we've got, and this picture, I think, spells it out quite well. You've got a little bit down there. It says, our rights are not up for negotiation. And I think the lady in blue is shouting the same thing back at her. So it's that issue again of, well, how do we do that with an increasingly fractured society? How do we handle that? Next, ecological. We're living beyond the means of our planet able to support us, is what's been, I'm no ecologist, but that's what I've read. There's some significant issues there. How do we then tie that in, particularly with the climate angle? How do we work within the bounds of what is out there and what's available? Next, financial markets. I'm an economist by trade. Our monetary system requires economic growth to stand up. So there are things that are in-baked. We have to keep growing for that economic system to continue going. That doesn't tie in very well with the ecology point beforehand. It's quite difficult to do all of that. You've then got a pandemic. So we've had one of those. We've seen the impact that's had on us, and there's potential for more going forward. Next, is AI. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's something that's going to have an impact. It's going to have some really good impacts, but there's going to be losers as well. And it's how do we work within that? And the final one, money. There is just not the amount of money that we require there to be. You've got lots of things there that are going to cost a lot of cash to do, and we have dwindling resources to do so. So these are the external threats to our island communities. These are things we have next to no control over. We can try and influence, so climate, we can do our part, but there's nothing the island of Orkney can do to stop the potential impacts of climate change on our islands, because we're not big enough. We don't have the scale to do so, and same with a lot of these. So these are threats, these are things from outside. Now there's going to be some good opportunities too. There are some positives, we're going to come to those in a minute, but these are some stuff that's going to potentially wash up on our islands that we have to respond to or try and plan for. Not saying all of this is going to happen, but there's some stuff here that's going to require a bit of adaptation. So some of the challenges closer to home. First one, population. Michael's just done a brilliant job of working through that. Aging demographic. We have a housing shortage, which impacts on the retention and attraction of younger people. That's my background. Spent 16 years at the council building houses. Well, not building houses. You don't want to live in a house I've built, but managing houses being built. And the very market, the very demographic we want to retain and attract is the demographic that's least able to meet its needs in the market. So it's how do you adjust to that? Next, you've got infrastructure challenges. We've got lack of investment in existing infrastructure and also new replacement infrastructure, and the fact that a lot of that infrastructure isn't climate ready. And it's going to take an awful lot of money to get it there. So those are local challenges, things we can do about them, but they're all local. We then have significant funding pressures. Ferries is a really obvious one for that. We have a huge pressure on public services. We have impact from Scottish and UK government political changes, so funding, where they put stuff, what they prioritise. Again, if it's central belt focused, as Michael was saying, Inverclyde and co are going to be not very happy if it's very island focused. It can be quite difficult to work through that. And then you've got decision making, which is often at an international, national and local level, can be quite based on short-term business as usual thinking. And it's how do we adjust to that and how do we work through that. But there are some positives, opportunities. Offshore wind, as was discussed yesterday, massive potential opportunity for us in the islands. It's here, it's on our doorstep, we've got real opportunities there. Potential for infrastructure developments, which can drive jobs. That, in turn, can drive potential population increase and demographic resilience, as we're drawing in more of those younger people and retaining more of those younger people. That helps with the school roles, it helps address that population imbalance. There's real opportunity there. And we've also got potential for that renewable generation and those opportunities to help sustain our islands, to use that energy locally. We also have the potential threat of that being almost a new form of extraction. Our resources are generated here and taken elsewhere. But we've got the potential to utilise those. Agricultural innovations, that's vertical farming. There are real opportunities there for growing more of our own. Helps in the net zero as well. You're not importing strawberries from Chile, you're growing your own. But also a traditional agriculture is innovating all the time. There's some really good stuff going on there with agronomy and various things as well. We've got new quicker and cheaper building systems. Housing's my background, modular housing. We don't want to replace traditional build, but it's certainly a place for it to help, and there's other technologies advancing there as well. And digital infrastructure is a key one. The ability to work remotely, work from home. That's something now that in the Isles, you used to have to provide a house and a job. Now you can potentially, as long as there's good internet connection, you provide the job, the house, household will bring the job with them. That's a game changer for small islands, as long as they've got the house and the digital infrastructure, and that's where you've got to try and plan ahead. And then finally, the island way of life is often readily more adaptable to potential future issues. So we've got the ability, with our ability to grow our own and do various things here, to actually adapt quite well to some of the things that are coming along. So how do we develop sustainability? What are the things that we can do to try and see some of those external threats, see some of those internal challenges and things that we have to address, population being a key one, and then access and grab some of those opportunities. The first thing is foresight. What's coming down the line, both positive and negative? What is it that's out there that might impact on us? It might not, but might impact on us. What are the external threats, the local challenges, strengths, the opportunities we've got? And also a key question, actually, what do we want our communities to look like in the next 20 years? If we're looking ahead, what do we want to do? Which direction do we want to take? As a community, where do we want to go and where do we want to be? Next thing is adaptability. How do our communities adapt to these challenges and the opportunities that are out there? How do we work around things like preventative action? What can we do to prevent some of these things from happening? How do we minimise those weaknesses? How can we capitalise on our strength and exploit the opportunities that are out there? How do we work through some of this stuff to say, well, actually, you know what? Yeah, we can take some of those challenges. We can work through that. We can deal with that. We're well placed to do that. That's going to be a bit more difficult, but we can work with others to try and figure out how to do it. And then that builds in resilience. How do we enhance the resilience of our communities to the challenges that we're facing? And taking a longer term view and decision making is a key part of that. We can make decisions for the short term, or we can make decisions for that longer term. Well, actually, it might be in the short term, that decision might be unpopular, but it's what it actually brings us in that longer term. And identifying and prioritising key infrastructure and services. What are the things that we're going to require in the future, and we need to make sure we're investing in those. And then that's not easy. Sometimes that's not a popular thing to do, so you've got to try and take the community with you. So that resilience piece is about, well, yeah, and climate's a key one for that. We may have to reduce our way of life now so that our kids and grandkids have a better way of life in the future. And it's trying to make that, it's trying to sell that. And then finally, that helps to bring sustainability. What do we need to grow the long-term sustainability of our communities, our economy and the environment? Population targets. Do we set, not just the number, 25,364. Excellent, we're done. No. How do you break that down? How do we get more younger people in? How do we redress that balance? What do we have to do to redress that balance? It ties in then with that resilience, that adaptability. And do we have adaptation and resilience in a net zero way? Now, we could just do net zero on our islands as the priority, net zero at all costs. That's not sustainable. That's not going to help our islands be resilient. But if we do resilience and adaptation and sustainability in a way that is net zero, that you get the net zero benefits, but you're also getting that resilience angle as well. So instead of flying our strawberries from Chile, we grow them here. Now, your small islands get access to strawberries more the year round. There's potential economic benefit, and you've got the net zero benefit if you're not flying them from Chile. Everybody wins, but it's doing that in a way that is sustainable. And what's the economic model we require to do that? There's been lots of things like donut economics and various things, which is trying to help us live within that boundary of what the planet can provide, but also in a way that's net zero and sustainable. So the next thing, there's lots of plans out there already. These are some of the really good ones. So these are kind of future plans. What do we want our area to look like in end of date? Usually it's 2050. Now, there's some really, really good stuff in these, but they're often done from that existing picture that they've not taken in the potential external threats. They've got climate in there, yes. Some of them have got population in there, but they've not got a lot of the other stuff that might impact on us. But again, you can't, I'm not at all saying that you can be resilient from everything. We can't entirely insulate ourselves from stuff. But there are things we can do to help make our communities more resilient to whatever it is that's coming down the line. And it's how we make those decisions. Population's a key one. That's going to be something we need to make ourselves more resilient in terms of population. What can we do to do that? And some of these say there's some brilliant plans here, but it's how do we kind of potentially build on that and do it in an island-specific way. So, building a long-term sustainable future first. As we've mentioned, identify those potential external threats. You then identify the potential local challenges and opportunities. Then, what do we need to do to help our communities adapt to those? You're then bumping into, right, well, next one down. What do we want our community to look like in 2050? In context of what we've just discovered, what are the threats that are coming from outside? What are the things that we need to deal with inside? What are the really good things we can grasp hold of and develop? What do we want our community to look like? How do we want that to work? You're then bumping into that, how do we maximise potential of those strengths and opportunities that have arisen in light of that, what we want our community to look like? Cruise was mentioned yesterday. Cruise is something that has happened to Orkney. We've benefited from it, but there's also been potential issues with it. So when we're looking forward, how do we maximise the strengths to maximise the benefit, not maximise the thing, but because it may well be the maximum benefit to the community is not exploiting that opportunity to the maximum. It's exploiting that opportunity to the maximum benefit for the community. And you can only do that when you've got the context of, well, what does the community want? So next, you're looking at things like infrastructure. What are the key infrastructure and services that we need to protect and enhance? Now, this is a key one. And picking on some like roads. Roads aren't sexy. Roads aren't going to win you an election as a councillor, and they're probably not going to lose you an election as a councillor either, or as a politician, unless it's the A9 dueling. That might. But one of the key things we've got is that roads are a massive key infrastructure piece. Now, we have brilliant roads here in Auckland, so we've done very, very well. But the cost of maintaining those roads is going up because materials increase, labour costs increase, but the budgets are going down because there's such pressure on public sector budget, that budget has to be spent elsewhere. Now, if we took a short-term view of roads, well, sorry, the budget doesn't meet what we need it to do, so our roads are going to get slightly worse over the next couple of years because we can't maintain them. That's a short-term view. If you're taking a long-term view, well, if that's been identified as a key piece of infrastructure, what do we have to move revenue funding from elsewhere to sustain that key piece of infrastructure at a point where it's viable? Well, if we can't do that, sorry, there's not money for that, okay? Option 2, do we see that the economy is going to rebound to a point where we're going to have capital funding? Government's going to give us more money, so we're going to have more capital funding in the future that allow us to bring that infrastructure back up to the level it was before. If that's a no, option 3 is, okay, manage decline. This has just been mentioned in terms of population. We've got an infrastructure here that we're not going to be able to maintain to the standard we have done, but let's make an educated decision, let's make educated choices on how we decline or how we maximise the potential of that infrastructure without the right amount of funding to maintain it going forward. Or the fourth option is we just take the short term, and then when we bump into the fact we don't have enough money and it's not in the position we want it to be in, we're left with much fewer options. So it's how do we do things like that? And that's a key piece of infrastructure and a key thing we need to look at. How do we then build resilience and sustainabilities into our community? In terms of what we've learned here, what can we do to build additional resilience? And also, do we need things like aspirational population targets? Are there certain things that we need to then bring in terms of population target, in terms of other things, to say, well, actually, to do all of this, we're going to require X, we're going to require Y, we're going to require offshore wind to be to be at that level, which means more jobs, which means more houses, which means various other things. So this is very much my thinking. This is the thought and process. This is not a conclusion. This is just an observation of what's going on and what I'm seeing happening and seeing from various research and various things that are out there in terms of these areas, saying, well, how do we locally and in different islands, as Mike just mentioned, islands are different. This isn't an Scottish islands, we need a vision that will work for everybody, because it won't. This needs to be done at a community level, working alongside the Scottish Government and others to say, well, we want our islands to be successful. We all want that. But we also have to sometimes take cognizance of some of the stuff that maybe we've not been taking cognizance of properly or fully. Because, to be honest, I don't want to open that box. I've got 2 young kids. I want them to be able to live here if they want to live here. I want this to be sustainable. But it's doing so in a way that sometimes you have to continue questioning. You've got to ask questions. I'm asking questions I don't want to ask because I don't want the answer, to be perfectly honest. Because it might be some difficult answers in there. But this is this is my thinking. Open to any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Luke. Nice stuff. Gosh, my head's spinning. But yes, that's fine.
Just inviting you to use the microphone.
All right. Yes, good.
If you can stand up, and I just
Forgetting things. Okay, so very good. So, that's great, Luke. Thanks very much. And I say what I was saying there, my head was spinning with all of those ideas and questions, and it all makes sense, I think, if I've listened right. Okay, so any questions, points? Yes, sir, in the middle there.
Thanks, Luke. Very thought-provoking as ever, and I'll come back to a point. I've asked you a question right at the end, but I want to pick up a point that Michael made that I think you've touched on as well. this piece about the fact that islands are not uniform, and therefore the planning processes needed to be local, which therefore is a distinct, as a point of sincere irritation, that impact assessments for islands are done not on islands. And I do think there's a real need to repatriate the impact of policy decisions to the communities that are going to be affected by them, as opposed to being done in the central belt, which is what seems to happen at the moment. One of the points I did want to touch on, that, as I understand it, you've been involved in some work with development trusts and providing housing, and the advantage of that seems to be that the development trust can actually put on its own quotas or its own rules as to who is to occupy those houses. Can you speak more about that for a second?
No, that's something they're called local lettings plans, and that allows development trusts to get more funding from the Scottish Government to build housing. It's more flexible. It's rented out at a social rented level, so it's the same as housing associations and councils, but it's rented out using the private sector tenancies. But development trusts can then set priorities for the households type. So if they've got the schools in decline and they want additional families coming in, they can prioritise extra points for families. If there's a certain skill set that they're lacking, they can prioritise again points for that skill set or people in those sort of areas. They've got to let within the law. They can't just say, well, we want Dave over here to get the house, but they've got to do it in a way that's viable. But they're allowed to do that and prioritise that in a certain way, which does help. And again, your question is, that allows it to stop just older people potentially moving in if you need younger people coming in, but if you need certain skill sets. And again, every time they re-let, there's only so many hairdressers an island needs. So if that's your priority for your first house, you then change it and you always check it, and you're rebalancing things for your next properties that you're renting out and how you potentially do that. So there are tools there available at the moment, and there's quite a few development trusts in Orkney, and I'm also working with trusts elsewhere who are looking at this sort of thing as well. So there are opportunities, and say the Scottish Government Islands Housing Fund Rural Islands Housing Fund is a really, really good tool, and it's something that we're certainly hoping will carry on into the next Parliament, because that's going to be key for helping out smaller islands, in particular, sustain their populations.
You know, the idea of communities coming up time and time again, and the need for devolution within Scottish society. But we can maybe talk about that later. Well, there was this, sir. There's a question, guy in the middle there with the striped shirt.
Hi. You were talking about housing there, so I'm just wondering if there are any approaches being looked at where there's a lot of elderly populations living in larger houses potentially, and realigning the housing stock by encouraging or making good solutions for elderly people to sort of stay in smaller properties or new properties that are more sort of tailored to the needs sort of thing.
Yep, certainly are. There's a number of development trusts looking at building 1 and 2 bedroom properties in central locations. So there's a number of organisations looking at co-housing, which is almost that kind of people coming together to support each other. As I mentioned, councils have got significant pressure on their budgets, so home care and various things are going to get more and more pressured as the population ages. So co-housing is about supporting each other, and that's a really good. There's a project being developed in South Ronaldsay for that. Which is working its way through that process. There's also a number of development trusts looking at, say, building smaller units in central locations near shops and the like. That then potentially allows their properties to be opened up. So larger family properties, they're moving to the centre. Those properties could either be purchased by the development trust and renovated, or could be sold on the open market again to households coming in. So there's certainly projects looking at that as a way of trying to maximise the length of time those older households can remain on their island. And also then it helps maximise the potential of the existing housing stock that is in the island as well.
Is there another one? Yes, Des.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Luke. So the example you've given of the roads is excellent, and the options you presented there. So climate change is a real issue for freeze thaw. But also thinking about the heavy vehicles that are damaging the roads. I think coaches in particular arising from the cruiser trade. So you're then thinking, so surely with limitations in public funding, we need some form of extra revenue from these heavy users. It's touching what Donna was discussing yesterday. I mean, how contentious is that? to say, look, we know what's causing these problems in the roads, therefore we can identify, as it were, polluter pays or impactor pays to alleviate this. Why is that so contentious?
As not being a roads engineer, I don't want to get myself, but that is a difficult one, because you say there's not enough money at the moment to do all the things that require to be done, and I think that the people are feeling that everything that could potentially be taxed is being taxed, but at the same point, as you mentioned, there is an increase in heavier goods vehicles, but if you've got heavy goods vehicles being increased into if your delivery companies get taxed more, the tax just gets passed on to the person delivering for. So it's trying to take stuff in that holistic picture of, this is a key piece of strategic infrastructure. What is the best way of us maintaining this key piece of strategic infrastructure? Because often we've got things like road tax, which isn't on electric vehicles. But we want more electric vehicles. But nobody's thinking about, how do we redo, we can do pence per mile. Well, that doesn't help us up here, because there is no public transport for me to take from my house so I have to drive. So it's doing this in a holistic picture that says, actually, we need to assess how we do this. 20-minute communities and stuff are fine. If I was to try and ride, I'd get run over within a week and a half. So I'm then a cost to the NHS. So it's trying to look at this within that holistic picture of how do we prioritise these key pieces of infrastructure, how do we pay for them, and what do we have to lose off the other end, because we're not a bottomless pit.
No, so I'm supporting your approach. You're absolutely right to pose these questions and to be hard-nosed about it.
Thank
you.
There's an online question.
All right, okay.
Yeah, a question online. How can Ireland best manage the decline in European funding that supported so much infrastructure over much of the last few decades?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I've just done a piece of work on that, a private piece of consultancy for the council, and one of the key things, Orkney's received huge amounts of European funding over the years. We were Objective 1, but post 2014, when we lost that Objective 1 status, the amount of funding coming in was less. So it's a really difficult thing, because you say in terms of capital projects, this building received an awful lot of European funding. There's a huge number of projects that have, and when it comes to replacing or upgrading or big long-term maintenance of these facilities, that's going to be a really difficult thing to try and do. Now, we're getting some good funding in from the UK government, the Scottish government. They have replaced some of that European funding. Sometimes it's not been a direct like for like, but there's been quite good stuff that's come in. But there's also still gaps there. And communities, I think an awful lot of it is trying to generate some of your own income. I work for the North Royal Trust. We've got some cruise income coming in. We've only got 7 cruise ships coming in this year. It's an island of 60 or 59 people according to the census. And we're trying to bring in that income. And it's a really good way of bringing some income to the trust, some income to local businesses, and also some income to the individual islanders themselves who are doing tours and things. So we're bringing in some cash there that helps redress that balance. Renewables are a key way. A lot of the islands have got some really good renewable generation opportunities. Those turbines are coming to end of life. I think Becky's going to talk on some of that in a moment, so I'll leave it to the expert on that. But renewables is a real opportunity there potentially as well. And also things like offshore wind. Those things are going to impact on our communities. How do we get community benefit from them? And how do we get good levels of community benefit, not just, we'll give you this, is a key issue as well.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, there's one here.
Thanks very much. I think it was very insightful and a lot of things to think about. Certainly it's not easy thinking there's so many islands, and but I get how it needs to be community led, because different islands pose different challenges at the first presentation on yours as well. Do you think there is a way to get that balance, that priority right? Because, for instance, agricultural people might be saying something else, that they've got priority, so is infrastructure, and so is digital people. So how does an island take that into consideration and into the, for instance, the 2050 vision?
Yeah.
In your opinion?
No, that's a really good question, and that's a really difficult one to answer. As an individual, I've got my opinion, but we've got elected councillors, we've got community councils, we've got development trusts, we've got individuals, we've got sector bodies and various things, all of which will have an opinion, and it's getting that community together to have that conversation. But it's got to be an open and transparent conversation. And a lot of our conversations, we're in an election at the moment, it's just about slagging each other off. We need to get to a point where we're actually having a discussion on what are the key issues and how do we tackle those key issues. Not what are the key issues and who can I blame for them. What are the key issues and how do we as a community say, these are things we need to tackle. How are we going to do that? What can we do and what can't we do? And it's being open about it rather than being political about it. And that was probably too political a statement to say in the run-up to an election. Sorry. I don't represent any elected party.
Okay, well, I think we're done on that, but we're not done with you, Frank. I think you're not done either. I think you've got a lot of work to do in the next few years. So thank you very much for that presentation. I think I called you Frank in your look, so I do apologise. Okay, folks, that's the end of this, the first session this morning. So we've now got a break for about 20 minutes. And so there's coffee and biscuits over there. And if you want to ask Luke more questions or Michael more questions or tell them where we got it wrong or needs to be emphasised, you've got an opportunity. So back in 20 minutes, please. Thank you very much.
It's more just like lots of questions.
Hello.
Hello, folks. That's about time up now for tea. Well, I think that demonstrates that we're doing well, because when you can't get people back easily after the coffee break, it suggests we're having a good time. So I think I should explain that the reason Des and I yesterday and today haven't been giving long introductions to the speakers is because you have the notes on who's who here, and is that the case online as well? Yes, so everybody will be able to find out who the speakers are if you want to find more detail about them. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Becky Ford, who is something quite... I've never heard of a relief lecturer, but...
it means a zero contract.
Oh, see, well, that's not good, but anyway, you're an Arcadian, which is great, and you're going to be speaking about something which is hugely relevant to what we've been talking about this weekend. I've never heard of Community Energy Scotland, so I am looking forward to hearing about that. And you're going to be talking about community as a decarbonisation technology, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks everybody and thanks for inviting me to speak today. So yeah, I'll explain a little bit about the different logos. This one here. Oh, down a bit. Okay. Better. Closer. Hear me? Yes. Good. Okay. I'll try to remember to speak into the microphone and not wander about. Okay, so I'm going to speak about community as a decarbonisation technology, and as you can see, I've got different logos. Yeah. The relationships that we've spoken about already today, and it's great coming at this point because everybody's already done a lot of the work for me. So island communities are at the sharp end of the current eco-social crisis we're facing. We've got market failure, so evidenced in the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis. Transport on islands is a massive problem. Housing, we've spoken about, Luke has described. Sustainable tourism, as Donna spoke about yesterday, is tourism sustainable? What does sustainable tourism look like? Aging populations, as Michael's spoken about, which leads to a care crisis in some islands, and that's before we even get on to the effects of climate change that we're already feeling, we're already experiencing. We've talked a lot about community, and I want to stop right now and say we need to define what we mean by community. What are we talking about? We've got community benefit, we've got community population trends, we've got community development, but what do we mean when we talk about community? And I want to argue that we need to stop talking about community as a noun and start thinking about community as a process. And community as a process is about understanding and caring for and having a commitment to people and place. It's about understanding that there's about the expertise in the complexity of local context. It's about recognizing interdependency between the people in a place and the people and the place. And it's about an ability to work together across difference and disagreement. A lot of times communities used like we're talking about a great big group hug where everybody loves each other and we all get on great and it's all, it's just all sunshine and roses. It is not. It's often about differences, about hostility, about conflict, but it's still about the ability to work together despite that. And to do that, we need to build relationships of trust and commitment. And at its very best, and this is where Community Energy Scotland comes in, at its very best, community allows for shared ownership of assets and for collective benefit. It gives people agency and responsibility, and I've deliberately written responsibility like that because that's how Donna Haraway writes it, and it's about the ability to respond. And so what I'm going to try and persuade you of today is that community as a process is a powerful tool in decarbonising ways of living on a changing planet. So a little bit about why I'm speaking about this. I have hats, lots of hats. Today's hats, I have my Community Energy Scotland hat, I have my UHI Institute for Northern Studies hat, and I have my Island Centre for Net Zero hat. So Community Energy Scotland, for those who don't know about us, we're a charity. We've got over 500 community group members, so we're a membership charity. We've been involved in over 1,500 projects across Scotland. We've got 25 staff based from Shetland down to Dumfries and Galloway. And our mission is to work with communities to support, promote and represent the community energy sector. We provide technical assistance, knowledge sharing, and we champion the role of community-led action in the transition to a low-carbon future. So with my academic hat on, I did my PhD at the Institute for Northern Studies, where I was lucky enough to have Donna Heddle as my Director of Studies, and I'm sorry she's not here, but Donna, I owe all of the academic things that have happened to me to Donna. My PhD title was Words and Waves, Ecological Dialogism as an Approach to Discourse, Community and Marine Renewable Energy in Orkney. So explain a little bit about that. My background was in English language and literature, and then I hung out with quite a few anthropologists. Laura Watts, I blame, who was mentioned in somebody else's presentation, I blame for pretty much everything that's happened to me since, because she got me interested in the fact that Orkney was a centre for innovation in marine energy technology. And I was interested in how the fact that this cutting edge technology, which was answering a global crisis, was happening in the place where I grew up, in Stromness, in the primary school where I went to primary school, in the secondary school where EMEC is based, was a school that I started my secondary education in. And I was fascinated by this. And my interest is in how people make meaning in places. And out of that, I developed ecological dialogism as an approach. It's based on that understanding that meaning is emergent through the physical act of languaging. Communication is embodied, it's enacted, it's extended into our environments, and it's a process of communicating and relating. And it occurs within what I call ecologies of meaning making, and these are always both physical and cultural. What Donna Haraway calls nature culture. You can't split them, they're together, always together. And it's a process characterized by the tension between individual experience and our creative expression as individuals, and the need for shared understanding that we make together with the people we interact with. So community is a process. Community is what people do in places. And I was inspired, because my background's English language and literature, by these two quotes, and they shape everything I've done. First, by George Mackay Brown, the Stromness poet, "It is the word, blossoming as legend, poem, story, secret, that holds a community together and gives a meaning to its life." And then my academic crush, Mikhail Bakhtin, the Russian philosopher of language and literature. Language for the individual consciousness lies on the borderline between oneself and the other. The word in language is half someone else's. So these are the things that have shaped my thinking. And when I looked at the way that the renewable energy sector had developed in Orkney, I was looking at stories, because stories are powerful. Dominant cultural narratives shape our understanding of and our relationship to each other and the natural world. And to be able to tell better stories, we need a better understanding of and engagement with the power of stories, because the world we make is shaped by the stories we tell. So by understanding community as process, we're able to recognise the role of storytelling in building relationships between people and places. As individuals, we make sense of our personal embodied experiences of the world in relation to shared cultural narratives, and in dialogical relationships, always two-way, with others, so that personal narratives are woven into shared stories of life in community. And at the heart of this are questions of authorship and authority, because to understand relationships between people and place, we need to understand who is writing the stories and who is telling them. Or, as Donna Haraway says, it matters what stories tell stories. It matters whose stories tell stories. And I would add, it also matters how stories are told, where they're told, and who they're being told to. And in that telling, care is really important. And again, I want to be really explicit about what I'm talking about when I talk about care. We talk about care usually about care like caring responsibilities, social care, care for children. I'm talking about care as Maria Puig de la Casa talks about it, as care as a living technology with vital material implications for human and non-human worlds. Care is it's part of our process of how we do things. And stories can be understood as a form of care. On a personal level, we use stories to establish and strengthen relationships. And on a community level, we use stories to transmit our ethical obligations of care to each other and to the places where we live through the role of stories in shaping and sharing community ethos. So using care as a living technology is hard and skillful work. The labours of care are complex, and we need to continually respond to the changing circumstances, and Luke has highlighted what some of those threats are. And they're part of this dialogical process of community and individual meaning making. So there's always a tension between the needs of the individual, the needs of the community, and the changing context in which all of this is playing out. And the biggest problem for care as a living technology is it's often invisible, and it's very often unpaid or undervalued. And the reason that this is the way is because the relationships of power are what are shaping this, and they're continually being enacted and renegotiated. So in my PhD research, I looked at Orkney stories, and community discourse in Orkney is shaped by really powerful shared narratives. They characterize Orkney as egalitarian, collaborative, mutually self-reliant. Orkney's special, it's a centre of the universe, and it's grounded in this long identity with its history and its sense of place. And these narratives can be seen as actively shaping how the renewable energy sector in Orkney is developed. It's allowed a focus on collaboration, both in terms of different organisations working together in the development of the technology, but also the way that the sector understands itself as part of the wider Orkney community. And as I said, there's an enormous amount of invisible work happening in this process. I did some field work with Laura Watts at EMEC and shadowed some wonderful people and watched what they were doing, and the amount of invisible care work that was going on to make that technology possible was mind-blowing. And it's intrinsic to the technology development. But in the discourses of power, the stories that get told about Orkney outside Orkney, whether those are academic stories or political stories or technical stories, the complex relational living technology of care for people and for places remains completely invisible, and it gets excluded. It's not there. Nobody's talking about the care work that went into making this floating tidal turbine. It's talking about the megawatt hours. It's talking about innovation and cutting edge technology. It's not talking about care. There's also another story about Orkney which gets told a lot. Orkney is a living laboratory. You see it in a lot of the technical and political narratives. Orkney's a living laboratory, which is great. It highlights the role of the islands as a centre for innovation, for research, But it also raises a question about the nature of the research and what the relationship of that research is to the living community and to the dialogical relationships. So because Orkney's a centre for innovation, one of the things it's done is attracted big projects. So one of my other hats is working for the Island Centre for Net Zero, which is part of the Islands Growth Deal. We've got £16.5 million of core funding from UK and Scottish Government. It's a 10-year project across 48 populated islands, Orkney, Shetland and the Outer Hebrides. And our target is to support net zero outcomes for the islands and develop the islands as a centre with international reputation for decarbonisation, supporting the supply chain, creating jobs. The 7 partners are the 3 island authorities, Community Energy Scotland, Aquaterra, who Luke works for, Heriot-Watt University, and of course EMEC. My role within ICNZ is developing the Island Community Action Network, which gives me the best job acronym ever because I'm the Island Community Action Network Development Officer. I can do. It's great. So the network is being developed to bring together community organisations across the 3 island groups. We're facilitating knowledge exchange and the sharing of experiences from communities to communities. So it's putting island communities in dialogue with each other. We're creating a toolkit of key information and resources to support practical action on decarbonisation, and this is being co-produced with the community members who are part of the network. As part of this, we're developing community resource centres which will put technology and connectivity into existing community buildings with community organisations and allowing a focus for community action for the wider communities in those areas. And we're also creating dialogue back in between the communities and the partners within the main ICNZ project. So it's about making sure that community experiences, community narratives and community voices are informing the process. Islands make context visible. That's why they're important in decarbonisation. As one of my informants in my research said, you can see who you're in this with. And as Priscilla Bellacasa points out, interdependency is not a contract. It's not some nice ethical thing that we think about theoretically or morally. It's a condition. It's the reality. You're on the island. When the boats don't go because there's been a big storm and you're down to the last sad-looking carrot in the shop, you can see who you're in this with. This is all we've got. So island communities understand the reality that consumerist capitalism tries to obscure. We belong to places. Places do not belong to us. Our stories are woven together with the stories of others, and I mean other people and other living things. And we're shaped by the weather and the landscape and by the sea, which is also, through climate change, continually remaking the boundaries of the islands. I'm going to get political, but we talk about what we're going to do about climate change, but what we ignore is the elephant in the room, which is that the systems which have created climate change are the systems that we're trying to tinker with to get ourselves out of it. And I'm putting up the Val Plumwood quote, because in the free market, nature has been changed into a commodity. It's become an interchangeable unit of profit production. And it excludes people and places. When we take action on climate, we have to negotiate relationships of power which are embedded in and enacted through the logic of capitalism. And if we don't question and think about the inequalities involved in these relationships, then the values of that underlying system are going to continue to work for their own ends. So this is why I'm arguing for community as a decarbonisation technology. We need to care for people and place, not as assets or resources to exploit, but as intrinsically valuable ecosystems which can sustain life for all. We need to think about climate action beyond net zero. As one of my colleagues says, the only sum that matters is the global sum. But for individual places, that's where the action is happening. So we need sustainable, resilient futures shaped by equity, fairness, inclusion and care. We need community-led development. We need place-based solutions that take account of context, that are place-specific, that give agency and responsibility to communities through building local capacity and trusted relationships. And we need community energy, not just community energy in terms of wind turbines, in terms of agency to organise and act. Understanding and being able to use local knowledge and expertise and share learning to create mutually beneficial collaboration with others, because communities, island communities, have things to teach everybody. And I'd just like to finally point out a piece of work that Community Energy Scotland's been involved in recently, which is a call to action paper, which we've done with partners DTAS, SCF, Community Land Scotland and the Scottish Community Alliance, where we looked at the potential for community energy for everyone. And we have 7 calls for action. We want accelerated growth in the community energy sector. We want government to set a wholly owned community energy target. We need to address the opportunities and challenges arising from repowering. So we've got community turbines which are coming to the end of their lifespan. We need community ownership. We need better opportunities for communities to own parts of developments. We need developers to actually be honest about what community development, community benefit means. It's not just a big check with your picture on the paper, giving the football team a new set of strips. It's got to be meaningful. It's got to be something that actually benefits the community. And we want the Scottish Government to set up a Scottish Community Wealth Fund, so that benefit is not just about the particular communities who have wind turbines in their back garden, but about creating benefit from things like the massive offshore developments that are here and are coming, so that that is part of a transition which is fair and just for everybody in Scotland. And I'm going to leave you with Val Plumwood again, because stories matter. If we are to survive into a livable future, we must take into our own hands the power to create, restore and explore different stories, with new main characters, with better plots, and with at least the possibility of some happy endings. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Becky. That was what we'll call it, wide-ranging and provocative, but also, I think, very relevant to what we've been talking about in the last couple of days. So, are there any points, questions, observations anyone wants to make to Becky? Yes, sir.
Thanks, Becky. I just had to jump in. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. One of the pieces that I note that might be a challenge in all this lot is that you mentioned about the fact that the hidden work is invisible by definition from the sort of contemporary narrative, particularly in the official narrative. I wonder, therefore, if you see there's a tension in trying to bring the public sector along with some of these aspects, because quite often things like, say, procurement rules deliberately seek to maintain a very even-handed approach, which has a habit of chasing towards the lowest possible cost, which then means best value tends to be used as cheapest, which therefore tends to mitigate against local communities getting full engagement. Yeah. Have you got any thoughts about how to bring the public sector along so that they can be comfortable with supporting local communities at the level which they really need?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, Neil. It really is, and I don't have an answer, but I think part of it is creating models of dialogue between the different bodies. So the project that I was involved in before ICNZ is Carbon Neutral Islands, which was a Scottish Government project, and that was about CES with a delivery partner, but we worked with trusted organisations within communities, so development trusts. They were given the funding to employ development officers, so there was a recognition within the Scottish Government that it was community-led, that the people delivering decarbonisation actions were in the communities and shaped by the communities, and those trusted organisations had a wider steering group which was supposed to represent the wider community. So it's about creating those dialogues and trying to get that process in, but it's not easy because a lot of the systems we're working with and working within, and whether that's, and a lot of it's to do with money, whether that's academic funding or public funding, like you say, that we want the least cost, not necessarily the best outcome. Oh, sorry.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, there's one over there. Yeah.
Hi Becky, thanks for that. Just in terms of you talking about trying to think of community as a process rather than using it as a noun, but we tend to default, even with that in my brain, I think we tend to default back to using it as a noun, diminishing that bigger picture. Have you got any idea of what language we could use to change how people think about it without having to explain the whole backstory every time?
Yeah, no, and I think it's about being really explicit about who we're including and who we're excluding when we define communities. Because obviously, community is a process, and you can go out and out and out like kids writing their address where they start with where they live and go out to the universe. You know, we're all in it together and all of that. But we need to be, in certain places, we need to be explicit about the definition we're using. And my problem is that we're not explicitly saying, in this project, in this particular situation, in this particular context, what we mean by community is this. And these are the people who are in the community, and these are the people who are outside of that community, rather than just using community as this kind of fluffy catch-all group hug thing. Because communities are about inequalities. It's about that tension. So it's being explicit and acknowledging that. And then what do we need to do to be more inclusive, to be more fair, to be more just?
I would agree with Laura on that point, that we need to think about verbs more. I was thinking also about the case, I think it's the Inuit language, who don't use nouns, they use verbs for everything. It's not a table, it's a thing to be used for something. And maybe we do need to start creating an undergrowth of changing that ability about how we, in our language, talk about things. Maybe we just need to start a revolution.
Excellent. I'm with you, Ali.
But there's other thoughts from both Luke's talks and yours I was thinking about, and one of the thoughts I had was, you talked about dialogue, and I was thinking about the art of debate is being lost in our society at the moment, and it's particularly enhanced by the discommunication during COVID. I know in some ways it was enhanced by the increase in technology and the ability to communicate remotely, but also we lost some of our community dialogue in that. In Strongness, one of the examples was the repurposing of our main hotel, where there had been, in effect, an island of debate in that hotel for years. And it was just an example of how I think in small communities it's easier to have that integrated debate because you're all brought together. Maybe a challenge is how in the public sector we can reignite the willingness to debate with in Whatley's case, the community as a whole, the Whatley at large. And part of that's the challenge of the size of a community and how far we can continue to have that happen. But I think the art of debate needs to be also reunited to allow many of these things. And there's a saying, money is the root of all evil. We need money, but we need to make sure that as far as possible it doesn't control. And I suppose one question is, how do we stop the big multinationals coming and taking over what we hope can be as you say, shared out between the communities of smaller places.
Well, if we can fix that one, Ali. Yeah.
Sorry, too many things in one go,
Yeah, where do we even start? But I think I completely agree with you about dialogue and about understanding that communication is more than just words. And I think that's the problem. We've got used to this digital, in some ways we're more connected than ever, but we're also more disconnected than ever. And so much of communication is about embodied, lived experience. It's about that interaction between people and place. And I'm not going to say more because I can see this.
I was merely looking at the watch because I was told we've got to announce a 10-minute break for the next speaker. So
right.
Was it Des? Did you miss? No? Okay.
No?
Okay. Well, thanks. Can we thank Becky again for that splendid talk? Okay, so we did the last speaker, the last, I feel like, external speaker is Tavish Scott. But we, in order to make connection and to make sure what happened yesterday doesn't happen today, we're going to have a 10-minute break to make sure we get the connection up and running and strong and robust and sustainable, to use a word that's been thrown around a lot today. Okay, so we've got 10 minutes till say 10 past 11, and we're back again, please.
Very pleased to join the RSE event, and sorry I'm not in the Picky. I've been in the Picky many times over the years. I was just actually thinking and reflecting that the last time I was there with a political hat on was an event where the 3 island local authority conveners brought together the islands in a summit. I think it was called a summit in those days. To discuss, in effect, autonomy or some degree of autonomy. And there was a very good former First Minister from the Isle of Man who gave the full Crown dependency take on how islands could move ahead. This was in the early days of devolution, I might add, so there wasn't maybe quite the appetite then all these appetites rise and fall. But it was certainly the Picky is a great kind of location for those kind of gatherings, and I'm sure your one is as well. Look, just a few quick oversights, if you like, on the salmon sector and the broader seafood sector, and then very happy to have a discussion about any of these issues. You're right. It is in the introduction there. You're absolutely right. There is an important judgment that society has to make. Never mind politicians and local authorities. You're in Kirkwall today, Organized Council or others. There's an important judgment that society needs to make about feeding the world. So let me start at the high end and take it down to the lower level. We have an ever-growing worldwide population. The United Nations makes estimates as to what that will look like by 2050, but it will be billions more. Some say 4, some say 6. And we cannot go on feeding the world in the way in which we fed it in the past. That is, by definition, not sustainable. I think that's broadly accepted. And seafood, the products of the sea, will be an increasingly important part of that. And salmon from Scotland is a small part of that seafood market. And salmon from Scotland, within the context of salmon from, say, Norway or Chile, is a small part of that as well. So it's important to look at this, I think, from the potential of what Scotland already does in seafood. Shetland, that you mentioned earlier, is my home. We export out of Shetland £400 million worth of seafood product every year. If you take pelagic species, inshore fisheries, salmon, mussels, and your traditional haddock, cod, and other products that are more often found in UK fish and chip shops. We're not a great eater of fish in the UK, I might add. Unlike our good friends in the European countries who devour fish, and they devour fish from Scotland as well. Look at how many boxes of langoustines leave Liverpool every morning heading to Spain, or frankly how many boxes of salmon leave Scotland every morning heading for Boulogne-sur-Mer and then into the markets of Europe. But I think that essential trade-off, I don't think it is a trade-off. I actually think there's a sweet spot in there where because we need to further rural employment, we need to make sure that places like Orkney have active local economies. We need to get the balance rather than the trade-off, the balance right between the 3 pillars for me. One is the social side of island life, the social side by which I mean the sheer population, an active working population that creates the activities that then allows us to look after people who are less fortunate than us. The second pillar is the environmental side, and you won't find anyone in Orkney or in Shetland or frankly down the west coast who doesn't want to make sure that we have a pristine environment and we export on that basis, because it's at the heart of what we do, certainly in the salmon sector, but I would argue in the fishing sector as well, for lots of friends who work in that too. And finally, that sheer economic point. If we don't create wealth in our economy, we don't have anything. And despite what some extraordinary politicians seem to say in modern day Scotland, which is nearly beyond my comprehension. But the economic points around our industry are pretty fundamental. We employ 2,500 people directly across the west coast, the Northern Isles and the Hebrides, 10,000 additional jobs from the supply chain, 2,500 companies in the Highlands and Islands alone, with a spend of £600 million in those local economies. And what that means in practical terms is that in Orkney, as with Shetland, as with the Hebrides, the average salary of someone working in the fish farm industry is broadly £38,000. Now, I would challenge anyone in your audience today to think of any other industry that puts that kind of money back into local economies in terms of average salary figures. I grew up with the Sullom Oil Terminal in Shetland, and that did incredible things for our economy. When I first went to school at the Anderson High School, At home, there were circa 400 or 500 kids in that school. Within 2 years, we were bursting through 1,000, and that's what. And with all that flowed from that, and most good. Of course, there were some challenges for any small island and rural economy, but be in no doubt, you'll find few in Shetland today who would say turn the tap off on oil and gas. And I do think there's again a bit of kind of intellectual disconnect between the chattering classes, and usually the phrase chattering classes refers to kind of inner London and Kensington and the the set around Islington and that kind of thing. Actually, it's equally applicable to Scotland, where we're quite good at doing a bit of chattering classes stuff in the central belt. And let me assure you, as an islander, that plenty of people in islands feel pretty remote from some of that language and some of those prevailing attitudes. And therefore, that's why our sector, and indeed my friends and colleagues across the whole of the seafood sector, do spend a lot of time making sure that, for example, senior civil servants, senior regulators, people who oversee our industry, and that's right, by the way, that's absolutely as it should be, know where Shetland is, know where Oban is, or out on a Calmac ferry, if one runs in fairness, to the Hebrides, to look at what we do and how we operate. And that mix of those three pillars is very important in the context, I think, of the discussion you're having today about islands. Two other thoughts I might just kind of share with you, if that's appropriate. Firstly, I think it's important to think about food in the modern world, yes, through the prism of sustainability, because that's what the customer expects. And believe me, that's not just in the UK, that is in the 50 markets we serve around the world. It's not just the Western world who worry about the environment, who rightly look closely at how industry, or in our case protein production, aligns to sustainability criteria, to the UN's international goals in relation to sustainable development, and so on and so forth. It is pretty well every market we are in. And that's why in our world of farmed fish protein production, there are both accreditation schemes that run here in the UK, by which I mean Waitrose, Marks and Spencer's, Aldi, you name it, they have some kind of accreditation system, and they do not sell, you'll not be surprised to hear, any product without those accreditation schemes. And then there are also international accreditation schemes that are companies who are both international in how they operate, but also very national in terms of where they operate, apply to and comply with as well. And those are important both for consumer reassurance, but also they're important in the context of how we operate, because in order to ensure that we have regulatory approval for sustainable growth, whether it be in our sector or in other sectors of protein, I always think we need to be very clear on data, evidence and facts in relation to how regulators see us. So in that sense, the transparency of our sector in relation to our numbers, for example, our impact on the environment, all the ways in which we are measured on that, both by these independent regulators, in other words, a supermarket, but also by government regulators, is a really important part of that mix. And that ensures there is, for those who wish to be entirely objective about how we produce protein in the modern world, whether it's here or in other countries around the world, for those who wish to be objective about it, they can look at those schemes, judge them, and benchmark them against others to make sure that they as a consumer, or they as a regulator, or they just as a concerned citizen of our country, have some ability to assess what our particular industry, in this case the salmon sector, is doing and how they're producing fish. So I do believe there's in that sense, and this would be, if it's helpful, my kind of final point, I do believe there's a huge opportunity for the seafood sector in the UK, and particularly in Scotland. We have a very, very fine environment which we absolutely align to government on and align to regulators on in terms of protections and in terms of understanding our importance to future generations. And that is at the same time as government rightly have objectives around food security, about making sure the people of the nation can obtain food. Different argument and different debate about price and where all that fits in. But fundamentally, food security is an increasingly important argument, and has been, I would argue, since long before the Ukraine war initiated, which of course had an impact on us as an industry as it did on the whole country. And before COVID happened, and before lots of other aspects which tend to be in modern political parlance the starting point for the analysis of what's going on in the country today. These trends, these aspects were part of what we were doing some time back in terms of our analysis of how we would grow for the future. So seafood is, I think, part, and will be for many years to come, many decades to come, part of the mix of how we feed that growing world that I described to begin with. And seafood from Scotland, because of its pristine nature, because of the provenance we can wrap around our product, we're in that sense in the same place as our good friends in the whisky industry and in others and other places as well. Scotland sells, the Scottish brand sells, salmon from Scotland is a premium product. Just ask the French consumer, they buy salmon from Scotland before they buy Norwegian salmon. And that is a great place to be. Can we be better? Yes. Can we do more? Yes. Can we grow sustainably? Yes. All those things are part of the debate that we have every day with regulators, government, and given we've got a general election underway at the moment, we also have with parties in the opposition as well. So a very exciting time for us. Great the RSE are looking at islands, and very glad to be part of your discussions today, and hope that was a brief but helpful overview of where my sector is and where we look to the future in terms of of the importance of islands in how we operate and how we grow. But also they are fundamentally important because when it comes to it, all of our industry is about people, and some of the islanders, and I would say this, wouldn't I, some of the islanders who work for us are the best people we've got in our businesses. So hope you have a great day, and hope Orkney's been very kind to you. I know the sun's shining in Shetland today, I hope it is in Orkney as well.
Well, thank you very much. That was a wonderful, brief, succinct and full overview, if you like, of where we are and how you see things. Are there any questions here, comments, observations from folks here in Kirkwall, which we can send down to Tavish in Edinburgh? I got that wrong, where he is. Yes, there's an online question there. So.
Yes, there's an online question, Chris. It says, I've heard it said that 1 tonne of farmed fish depends upon 6 or 4 tonnes of wild fish as feed for growing. Is that the truth?
Did you hear that question?
I cannot. No, I'm sorry, I did not hear it.
Good. Okay, I'll just read it out in a minute. Okay. So the question is, where is it?
Just here.
All right. Okay. Here we are. I've heard it said that 1 tonne of farmed fish depends upon 6 or 4 tonnes of wild fish as feed for growing. Is this, or what's the truth of this observation?
That's not true. It's our feed conversion ratio, and is basically 1 to 1.1, and increasingly feed for the farmed fish sector is now coming from new areas such as insect production and others. So we're moving the diet of fish away from marine content, in other words, from fish caught in the sea, to other components such as insects, and that's driven both by good business practice, but also by consumer requirements, and also our respect for the broader health of our oceans. I should also add, and the principle is a very fair question. I should also add that any fish that we use in farmed fish feed comes from resources that are sustainably fished and are a part of, boring you about the detail, are part of internationally recognised fisheries management schemes, and that's a very important criteria that we must meet as a sector in Scotland in order to sell our product to consumers. It's kind of baked into how we operate. So that's the basis for where fish comes from, where feed comes from, and how we use it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other online observations, questions, or in-house, so to speak? Yes, there's a question there. Oh yeah.
Hi, Tavish. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Cool.
I can.
So I'm Laura. I'm an Orkney resident and lover of salmon, but I don't eat an awful lot of it because of the environmental aspects of it. I'm very sad about that. I suppose I don't know a huge amount about the full process, and I was wondering sort of a broader question of where is the biggest source of your emissions or sustainability challenges coming from, regardless of the pressures you're facing from, policies that are in place or wider measures? Where are you seeing the issues coming from? Is it the diesel consumption? Is it other aspects like feed you're talking about there?
So the sector is committed to meeting the international and government requirements on being net zero by 2045. I appreciate that these targets are subject to some flexibility within government, but we are absolutely aligned, and I say government in a kind of plural sense, to meeting those national and international obligations. We have already made substantial changes to how we operate, and we're doing this, frankly, before it became, as it were, a government target enshrined in legislation in Edinburgh. So, for example, the feed barges that we have on in the sea that provide the food for our fish are now powered by electric generators, battery-operated generators. Many of our crew boats, including in Orkney, run on batteries, and there are other many similar sustainable initiatives, business-led sustainable initiatives to drive us towards being net zero. I think it's important to reflect that business is frankly sometimes ahead of where people think we are. The thing we don't do particularly well is telling people about it, and I plead guilty to that. We can do and should do a better job at telling the story of what we're doing on sustainability criteria. The other observation I'd make is the carbon footprint of salmon production is below that of nearly every other protein you can buy in the local shop in Kirkwall or indeed in the supermarkets of the UK. And we're very proud of that, and we work really hard on that, and that is an important component of the I suppose of the marketing and of the sales that we do with our supermarkets and with our buyers of product. They want and buy salmon on that basis because it helps them with illustrating to the broader consumer that here is a food product that is very low in terms of its carbon footprint. So we've got actually a perfectly reasonable and good story to tell, and also on environmental impact. We are monitored and regulated to the nth degree by SEPA and other government regulators. And again, I repeat, that is as it should be. I have no fear of that at all. I think that's absolutely right that a protein producer is regulated, but we're frankly regulated a heck of a lot more than any other industry in Scotland that's a protein producer. Again, no complaints about that. It's just how it is. So I'm a little bit. I don't quite take the argument that we're not regulated or no one knows what our environmental footprint is. Go and ask the chief executive SEPA. She certainly does, and she publicly reports on it. And they were in front of a parliamentary committee just this week on it. So there's plenty of scrutiny in that area. And again, that's as it should be.
Yes, there's one. We got a mic for
come on.
Okay.
Do this thing.
Right, okay.
Hello. Hi, Tavish. You suggested that the salmon industry is ahead of the curve, as it were, in terms of decarbonisation. To what extent do you think that's come about due to the mainly Norwegian ownership of salmon in Scotland? Is that a factor in? Do you think the Norwegian management influence has led that, or is that just a coincidence?
I don't actually. It's a great question. I'm not actually sure that the influence of Norway is as great as one might think. But bear in mind, one of our companies is also owned from Faroe, and they're very hot on sustainability, and are also a listed company on the Oslo Stock Exchange, so have to report in that sense to sustainability criteria under European Union rules and regulations in this area. And one of our companies is also Canadian-owned, actually Cook Scotland, who are the other major company operating in Orkney and in Shetland. Similarly, are very, very significant in terms of their sustainability reporting too. So I actually think it's less about who owns the business or where it's owned from, more accurately, and much more about business leadership in Scotland. I would say genuinely that the business leaders of our production companies, as well as the business leaders of our supply chain companies, of which a number are in Orkney as well, are generally not just on this, but very aware of it as well. Look, most of us have got kids. Most of us get badgered about this at home over the cup of tea. You know, it is rightly a fact of proper discussion at the moment at all levels of society, and I think we as businesses reflect both the need to properly do that, to be able to report on it and show we're making progress on decarbonisation, and also be accountable to that both as it were internally, by which I mean our direct families, because we all live this world too, but also because we must publicly report on it, and that's and I think that's a good thing, and something we're actually very comfortable with, not just now but for the future as well.
Thank you very much. There's one more. Des, you have a question? You want to come up here?
Thanks very much, Tavish. A question for me, just looking ahead then. What do you see as the greatest opportunity for your interests looking ahead to 2045 and hopefully net zero by then?
I think the most significant opportunity is the recognition now that seafood is already and has to be a much more significant part of the overall approach to how we feed and secure the world's population. There will be and are many strands to that, because we are more at the premium end of the food market, because Scotland does have a cachet as Scottish salmon rather has a cachet because of its name and the quality of the product, and how we then sell that into 50 countries around the world. But I do think that is the right kind of business opportunity for us. Lots of things need to happen to make that work, but in broad terms, the future of I think seafood and how we farm species is to high standards, to appropriate standards, to very high animal welfare standards, to all the other aspects that the consumer demands and needs to be demonstrated to see is very positive. And I say that because I spent some time with other colleagues who, for example, look after the sea bream industry in Turkey, or the sea bass industry in the south of Spain, in the Mediterranean. We're all in the same place. Is it competitive? Of course it is, because that's life. But is there a bigger and much more significant observation about what's going to happen around the world in the future? I just think you have to look at those big numbers and see what's going to happen. The other side to it, and I think implicitly in your question is, many of us, absolutely the West, the UK, I'm sure will be there or thereabouts on whatever the target ends up being, and being net zero and that kind of thing. How that compares to other places around the world that we either sell into or have relationships with in business, and frankly in diplomatic terms, will be more of an issue. And that's not a question to me, that's way above my pay grade, but I think that's a factor that we also watch closely as an industry, because Ukraine has a big impact on all of us in terms of that relationship, for example, with Russia, which used to be a market and is now utterly closed off to us. So there are lots of things going to happen over the next 20 odd years, but I wouldn't doubt that the direction of travel for us in terms of that net zero goal, but at the same time, I think that's entirely consistent with our ability to sustainably grow and play our small part in meeting the needs of the globe.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
So I'd like musical chairs here. But I think there are no more questions that I can see. So, Tavish, thanks an awful lot for what you've said to us in the last few minutes. It's hugely informative, actually, and I've learned a lot. I think everybody else has. So thanks for the wonderful contribution. As it happens, the last contribution to our weekend's gathering. So we often enjoy the agricultural show. So thanks very much. So bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Yes, this is you. Or is us anyway? No, you can, yeah. Okay.
Right, can you just check that you can hear us all right? Brilliant, thank you. So we've got just 4 concluding slides. Just to remind us where we came from, we've worked very closely with colleagues in High and UHI, with special thanks to Kate and Becky, as we said yesterday, putting forward this programme. Our original ambition, you'll have to judge whether this has worked or not, is to identify the opportunities for presentations, discussions, knowledge sharing, offering opportunities for expert speakers and listeners to come here, encouraging intergenerational and diverse events and discussions, and of course working with and promoting the special nature, culture and the many facets of the north and west of Scotland. I think we've done all of these things. We've had 3 events, first in Skye, then Stornoway earlier this year, and now in Kirkwall. We've had a mixture of on-site, virtual presentations, a lively question and answer session, terrific range of talks, lively engagement, and a lot of innovative and original and well-received presentations, genuinely so. So a couple of take-home messages, and Chris will want to add to these, and we've just put these up. I'll not read them all out, but I mean this sort of deeply worrying exodus of people away from the islands and the fantastic context that we've had there on that. Indeed, in fact, we've got an exodus or a decline in populations from some of the islands, but not in others, and clearly a much richer narrative presented around that today. There really is outstanding research and insights coming from across the islands, with key findings applicable much more widely across North Europe. And we heard that both yesterday and today, some of the international reach of the work that we're doing here. And I think it's very easy to forget the international reach of the work that's being done on the islands, both in the north and the west. It's really important that we have to invest in that. There's so much more we can do to listen, learn and apply, and a lot has been said today about the art of debate or conversation. And that's what we've tried to do here, is to try and engender a conversation. But I think we've got some way to go there. We live in a very polarised society at the moment, and perhaps we have very special opportunities through the community process that we heard from Betty here to try and develop the discourse into something richer and more meaningful in terms of moving forward. And it is good to talk, that's the other thing. We have to remember it is good to talk, and we've had the warmest of embraces from the audience here. But Chris, do you want to add to these sort of initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if I've learned anything from this, and I've learned an awful lot, and that I know I shouldn't use community as a noun, but I will. I'll need to go and do some homework on that. But I'm going to use community in its broadest sense, but largely as a noun. But if there's anything I've learned on Skye and on the outer islands and here, is the importance of community as something defined and inclusive. Is it hugely important, and that's where the future of the island lies. It doesn't lie with the state, it lies within the communities, and that has come over, has it not, in so many of the places we've been and the presentations we've heard, and so, you know, people power can be enormously important, I think, and our government, if you like, I don't want to make a political point, but the government in Scotland needs to trust more the local authorities and the local communities. I think that's as I say, something I do want to say this, so just it's more or less my last contribution to this series. When Des and I were involved, probably five years ago, it kicked off with developing the RSE's links with the north and the west. We struggled for a while to move things forward, and there came to a point about 3 years ago when we needed something to kickstart that relationship with the HIE and the UHI. And to be perfectly honest, I thought about it, Des thought about it, but one day after one of the meetings, one of the endless meetings, Zoom meetings we had with various peoples around the country, I literally took my pen up and a scrap of paper and I thought, islands. They are unique to this part of Scotland. Islands, and I'm interested in the past. It'd be nice to hear about what's going on currently, and let's look to the future. And it literally was a scribbled note, which I then typed up and sent to Des and others, and it was approved. And here we've done it. We've done it from one little scrap of paper. We are here, and we have completed our project. Well, we haven't quite completed the project, because what we need to do now, and I think this is up to Des and I and maybe we'll have to get back to the speakers, but I certainly think there needs to be, it's been great, the 3 sessions have been great, but we need to have, but they've been so good, they're worth capturing, they're worth keeping. There should be a legacy for the future. And now I don't know how we're going to do that, but I certainly think that would be not the icing on the cake, but really it would have made all the expense and the effort and so forth that's gone into this very much more worthwhile. So I'd just like to thank everybody here for supporting us in Skye and in Sornoway and here, the RSE staff, UHI staff, contributions from speakers. Des has been wonderful. He's kept my head up when I thought this isn't going to work. And speakers, all speakers today. I haven't got their names here, but Luke, Becky, Michael. Who else have I forgotten? Tavish. Yes, I think that's it. So, thank you to everybody. I hope you have a safe journey home. Some of you don't have to go far, others have to go rather further. But it's been great to be in Kirkwall. Thanks very much. That's it.
Thank you. Could we get a picture of the speakers? Any speakers who are here? We'd like to get a picture if that's all right. Thank you. And there's more tea and coffee.
Okay, close the stream.